The majestic thoroughbred crashed to his knees in the middle of the auction ring, his desperate eyes locking onto Emma's with an intensity that silenced the entire crowd. As strangers wiped away unexpected tears, Emma felt her heart shatter and rebuild in the same breath, knowing this wasn't just a horse collapsing, it was a soul pleading for one last chance at life. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty auction grounds as trucks and trailers pulled in one after another. The scent of hay, manure, and diesel fuel hung in the air, creating that distinct aroma that was both familiar and suffocating to Emma Wilson. At 32, she'd spent more time at horse auctions than she cared to remember, each visit leaving her with a heavier heart than the last. Today was no different as she walked between the temporary stalls, clipboard in hand, mentally noting which horses might still have a chance at a decent life and which were destined for the slaughterhouses across the border. Working for a small rescue organization meant Emma could only save a few, a reality that gnawed at her conscience with every auction she attended. The funding was limited, the space at their sanctuary even more so, and the endless stream of unwanted horses never seemed to diminish. Still, she came because saving even one life mattered. It had to. As she moved deeper into the auction grounds, the sounds of nervous whinnies and hoofbeats against metal gates grew louder. Most of the horses showed signs of neglect, ribs visible beneath dull coats, overgrown hooves, and eyes filled with either fear or resignation. Emma had learned to steel herself against the overwhelming urge to save them all, focusing instead on identifying those she could realistically help with their limited resources. "Back again, Emma," a gravelly voice called out, belonging to Mike Peterson, one of the regular auction managers. His weathered face broke into a half-smile as he approached. "Thought you might show up today." Emma nodded, offering a tight smile in return. "Can't stay away, apparently. Anything I should know about?" Mike scratched his beard, glancing around before lowering his voice. "Stall 43. Black thoroughbred gelding came in last night. Previous owner was some hotshot banker who lost interest when the horse stopped winning. Been racing him until he broke down, then dumped him here without a second thought." Emma felt her stomach tighten. It was a story she'd heard countless times. Expensive horses discarded like broken toys once they stopped being profitable or entertaining. "I'll take a look. Thanks, Mike." "Don't thank me yet," Mike replied, his expression darkening. "There's already interest from the meat buyers. Horse like that, tall and still got some weight on him." He didn't need to finish the sentence. They both knew what that meant. Emma made her way to stall 43, her steps quickening despite herself. When she reached it, she found herself looking at one of the most magnificent horses she'd ever seen. Despite obvious signs of neglect and the strain of over-racing, the black gelding stood at least 16 hands tall, with the unmistakable build of a thoroughbred. His coat, though dull and in need of proper grooming, hinted at what must have once been a glossy black that would shimmer in the sunlight. But it was his eyes that captured Emma's attention. Deep, intelligent eyes that seemed to hold stories of both glory and suffering. Unlike many of the horses in the auction pens, this one looked directly at her, assessing her just as she was assessing him. "Hey there, big guy," Emma said softly, extending her hand palm up toward the stall door. The gelding regarded her for a moment before taking a tentative step forward, nostrils flaring as he caught her scent. "What's your story, huh?" As if understanding her question, the horse took another step, allowing Emma to see the condition of his legs. Her heart sank. Even to her non-veterinary eye, she could see the telltale signs of racing injuries. The slight swelling around the tendons, the way he favored his right front leg. This horse had been run hard, pushed beyond his limits, and then discarded when his body finally gave out. She checked the information sheet clipped to the stall door. "Midnight Thunder," she read aloud. 7 years old. So young, and yet his racing career was already over. Without rescue, his future was bleak. Emma consulted her budget again, making quick calculations in her head. They'd planned to take 2 horses today, maybe 3 if prices were low. But a thoroughbred, even one with injuries, would likely cost more than they'd anticipated. Taking him would mean leaving others behind. "What do you think, Thunder?" she whispered, using the shortened version of his name. "Are you ready for a second chance?" The horse nickered softly, pressing his muzzle against the bars of the stall. Emma felt the familiar tug at her heart, the one that had led her to this work in the first place. She made a quick call to Diane, the founder of their rescue organization, explaining the situation and sending a few hastily taken photos. "If you think he's worth it, I trust your judgment," Diane said after hearing Emma's assessment. "Just be careful not to go over budget. We can't help anyone if we can't pay our bills next month." "I know. I'll be careful," Emma promised before hanging up. The auction began at noon sharp, the cavernous arena filling with potential buyers ranging from families looking for riding horses to dealers who would ship them across borders. Emma recognized the meat buyers easily. They sat together, speaking little, their faces expressionless as they assessed each animal purely by weight and potential profit. The horses were led in one by one, paraded around the small ring as the auctioneer rattled off their supposed qualities and the bidding commenced. Some went for decent prices to what seemed like good homes, while others sold for pennies on the pound to the meat buyers. Each time the latter happened, Emma felt a piece of her heart crack. She waited anxiously for Lot 43, Midnight Thunder. When he was finally led into the ring, there was a noticeable reaction from the crowd. Despite his current state, the gelding had presence. Something in the way he carried himself that spoke of his pedigree and former glory on the racetrack. "Ladies and gentlemen, Lot 43, Midnight Thunder, 7-year-old thoroughbred gelding with impressive racing bloodlines," the auctioneer announced, his voice booming through the speakers. "A bit of work needed, but good foundation for a pleasure horse or breeding program." Emma nearly scoffed at the description. The auctioneer conveniently omitted mention of Thunder's injuries or the fact that as a gelding, he couldn't be used for breeding. It was standard practice, she knew, but it still angered her. The bidding started at $500, which was higher than Emma had hoped. She waited, letting others begin the process, her hand clutching her bidding card tightly. The price climbed quickly, $600, $700, $800. She saw one of the meat buyers raise his card and her stomach churned. At $900, she finally raised her card. $900 from number 56, the auctioneer acknowledged. "Do I hear $950? Another card went up, a dealer Emma recognized, one who sold to rodeos and low-end riding stables, where horses were often overworked and underfed. $950 from number 22, "Do I hear $1,000? Emma raised her card again, her heart pounding. This was already stretching their budget thin, but something about Thunder's eyes kept her bidding. $1,000 from number 56. "Do I hear $1,050? The meat buyer and the dealer both seemed to hesitate, calculating their potential profits against the rising cost. Then, just as Emma began to hope they might back down, the dealer raised his card again. $1,050. Emma bit her lip. $100, she countered, knowing she was now officially beyond what they'd planned to spend. As the price continued to climb, something strange began to happen in the auction ring. Midnight Thunder, who had been standing quietly beside the handler, suddenly seemed to grow agitated. His ears pinned back, and he shifted his weight nervously from one leg to another. The handler tugged on the lead rope, trying to keep him still, but Thunder was fixated on something, or someone, in the audience. Emma followed his gaze and realized with a start that he was looking directly at her. Their eyes locked across the distance, and in that moment, she felt a connection that transcended the noise and chaos of the auction house. It was as if the horse was pleading with her, recognizing perhaps his only chance at salvation. And then, as the bidding reached $2,500, far beyond what Emma could justify spending, Midnight Thunder did something that brought the entire auction to a stunned silence. Slowly, deliberately, the magnificent thoroughbred began to lower himself to the ground. His front legs bent first, followed by his hind legs, until he was kneeling in the sawdust of the auction ring, his head bowed as if in supplication or surrender. The handler, confused and embarrassed, tried to pull him back to his feet, but Thunder remained firmly in his kneeling position. The crowd began to murmur, some laughing nervously, others watching in bewildered silence. No one, it seemed, had ever seen anything like it before. "Folks, seems like our thoroughbred is taking a little rest," the auctioneer joked, trying to maintain control of the situation. "Let's continue the bidding at $2,500. Do I hear $1,550? The auction house fell into an eerie silence as Midnight Thunder maintained his kneeling position. The handler continued to tug at the lead rope, his face flushing with embarrassment, but the horse remained steadfast, head bowed, front legs bent in a posture of surrender. Emma stood frozen, her bidding card clutched so tightly in her hand that her knuckles had turned white. There was something about this moment, something profound that seemed to reach beyond the cramped, dusty auction house and touch something primal in everyone present. A well-dressed man sitting in the front row suddenly stood up, his expensive boots and crisp jeans marking him as someone who didn't regularly attend these kinds of auctions. "That horse is clearly lame," he called out, his voice carrying across the now silent room. "Look at him. He can't even stand properly." Murmurs spread through the crowd as others began to notice what the man had pointed out. Thunder wasn't just kneeling. He was favoring his right front leg even in this position, his body language speaking volumes about his pain and exhaustion. The auctioneer cleared his throat uncomfortably. "As stated, the animal may need some work. We sell all animals as is. Let's continue the bidding at $1,500. But something had shifted in the room. The dealer who had been bidding against Emma slowly lowered his card, a frown creasing his brow. Even the meat buyer seemed hesitant, perhaps calculating whether the horse's condition would affect the value of the meat. Emma felt a surge of hope. "I'll give you $1,200, she called out clearly, lowering her offer rather than raising it. It was a bold move, but she sensed the changing mood in the room. The auctioneer blinked in surprise. This wasn't how auctions were supposed to work. "I have $2,500 on the table," he insisted, though it was clear the previous bidder had withdrawn his interest. "From who?" Emma challenged, her voice stronger now. "Nobody's bidding at that price. I'm offering $1,200, and I'll give this horse the care he needs." A tension-filled silence followed. The auctioneer looked toward his assistant, who shrugged almost imperceptibly. The handler in the ring was still struggling with Thunder, who had now begun to tremble visibly, his magnificent body betraying the strain and pain he was enduring. Going once at $1,200, the auctioneer finally conceded, his voice lacking its earlier enthusiasm. Going twice, Emma held her breath. Sold to bidder number 56 for $1,200. A collective exhale seemed to pass through the room. Emma felt lightheaded with relief as she quickly made her way toward the payment office, not wanting to give anyone a chance to reconsider. As she filled out the paperwork and handed over the rescue's credit card, she could hear continued commotion from the auction ring. Apparently, getting Thunder back on his feet was proving to be a challenge. By the time she returned, 2 handlers were now with the horse, trying different approaches to get him standing. Emma approached the ring, her heart aching at the sight. "Let me try," she said quietly to the nearest staff member. "He's mine now." The man gave her a skeptical look but stepped aside with a shrug. Your problem now, lady. Emma climbed carefully over the low fence and approached Thunder slowly, aware that every eye in the place was on her. She knelt down in the sawdust beside him, not caring about her jeans, and placed a gentle hand on his sweaty neck. "Hey, Thunder," she whispered, leaning close to his ear. "My name's Emma. I know you're hurting, and I know you're scared, but you're safe now. You're coming home with me." The horse's ear flicked toward her, listening intently. His breathing was rapid, his nostrils flaring with each exhale. "We're going to take care of those legs," Emma continued, running her hand gently down his neck in slow, soothing strokes. "No more racing, no more pushing past your limits. Just green pastures and time to heal. What do you say? Ready to start over?" For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, as if gathering his remaining strength, Thunder shifted his weight. With obvious effort and pain, he began to rise, first straightening his front legs, then pushing up with his hindquarters until he was standing, though unsteadily. A spontaneous round of applause broke out from the spectators, many of whom had remained to watch this unexpected drama unfold. Emma felt tears prick at her eyes as she took the lead rope from the handler and stroked Thunder's muzzle. "That's it, boy. Well done," she murmured, oblivious to the audience. In this moment, it was just her and Thunder, the beginning of a journey neither of them could fully anticipate. Getting Thunder loaded into the rescue's modest trailer proved to be another challenge. Each step was clearly painful for him, and Emma wondered just how extensive the damage to his legs truly was. Would their limited budget be able to cover what might be extensive veterinary care? She pushed the thought aside. They would find a way. They always did. Mike, the auction manager, appeared as she was attempting to coax Thunder up the ramp. "Need a hand?" he offered, his gruff voice softened with what might have been respect. "Thanks," Emma nodded, grateful for the assistance. Together, they eventually managed to get the reluctant horse into the trailer. As Emma secured the divider, Mike handed her a manila envelope. "His papers," he explained. "Previous owner left them. Might help you figure out what you're dealing with." Emma took the envelope, surprised. Papers were a rarity at these auctions, especially for horses bound for slaughter. "Thank you," she said sincerely. Mike nodded, then hesitated before adding, "What he did in there? I've been running these auctions for 20 years, and I've never seen anything like it, almost like he knew." Emma glanced at Thunder, who was standing with his head hanging low, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. "Maybe he did," she replied softly. The drive back to Whispering Meadows, the small rescue facility where Emma worked and lived, took just over an hour. Every bump in the road made her wince, imagining Thunder's discomfort. She called Diane to update her on the day's events, explaining about Thunder's dramatic behavior and the condition of his legs. "I've already called Dr. Michaels," Diane replied after listening to Emma's account. "He said he can come out this evening to take a look. And don't worry about the budget. What you did today matters. We'll figure out the rest." Emma felt a wave of gratitude for her mentor and friend. Diane had founded Whispering Meadows 15 years ago after retiring from a successful career in finance. What had started as a personal project to save a few horses had grown into a small but respected rescue operation that had saved hundreds of equine lives. Diane's practical approach balanced perfectly with Emma's sometimes overwhelming empathy, making them an effective team. When they finally arrived at the sanctuary, the sun was beginning to set, casting a golden glow over the modest collection of barns and paddocks. Two other staff members, Javier and Melissa, were waiting to help unload their new arrival. "I heard we got a thoroughbred," Javier said as Emma parked the trailer. Diane said he made quite an impression. "That's an understatement," Emma replied, climbing out of the truck. "But be careful with him. His legs are in bad shape." They opened the trailer, and Emma stepped inside to untie Thunder. The horse hadn't moved much during the journey, but his eyes seemed more alert now, taking in the new surroundings visible through the trailer windows. "Come on, Thunder," Emma encouraged gently. "This is your new home." With careful coaxing and support from both sides, they managed to help Thunder navigate the ramp. When his hooves touched the gravel driveway, he lifted his head and took a deep breath, nostrils widening as he scented the clean country air, the nearby horses, the sweet smell of hay from the open barn doors. For the first time since she'd seen him, Emma thought she detected a spark of something like hope in the gelding's deep eyes. It was subtle, a slight lifting of his head, a curious flick of his ears, but it was there. And for now, that spark was enough. "Welcome to Whispering Meadows, Midnight Thunder," Emma said, leading him slowly toward the barn where a clean stall with fresh bedding awaited. "Your new life starts now." Dr. Michaels arrived just as the last light of day was fading from the sky. He was a tall, lanky man in his 60s, with a full head of silver hair and hands that, despite their age, moved with remarkable precision and gentleness. He'd been the rescue's veterinarian since its founding, often providing his services at reduced rates because, as he frequently said, these animals deserve someone in their corner. Emma had settled Thunder in the quarantine stall, standard procedure for new arrivals to prevent the spread of any potential illnesses. The stall was larger than average, deeply bedded with fresh straw and equipped with an automatic waterer. Though obviously exhausted, Thunder had accepted a small amount of soaked hay cubes, which Emma took as a positive sign. "So this is our kneeling thoroughbred," Dr. Michaels said quietly as he entered the barn, medical bag in hand. "Diane filled me in on the phone, said it was quite a sight." "I've never seen anything like it," Emma admitted, leading him to Thunder's stall. It was as if he knew exactly what was happening and what he needed to do. The veterinarian nodded thoughtfully. "Horses are far more perceptive than most people give them credit for." He approached the stall door slowly, observing Thunder's demeanor before entering. The horse stood at the back of the stall, head low but ears forward, watching them warily. "Let's see what we're dealing with," Dr. Michaels murmured, entering the stall with the practiced ease of someone who'd spent a lifetime around horses. He began a methodical examination, starting with Thunder's vital signs and working his way down to the legs that were the primary concern. Emma stood just outside the stall, holding her breath as the vet carefully palpated each of Thunder's legs, paying particular attention to the right front where the swelling was most pronounced. Thunder flinched visibly when Dr. Michaels touched certain areas but stood remarkably still otherwise, as if understanding that this discomfort was necessary. "Good boy," the vet murmured periodically, his voice low and soothing. After completing his initial examination, he straightened up with a sigh that Emma had learned to recognize over the years. Not hopeless, but certainly concerned. "What's the verdict?" she asked, though part of her didn't want to know. Dr. Michaels stepped out of the stall, closing the door behind him. "He's got significant tendon damage in both front legs, worse on the right. Suspensory ligament as well. Classic injuries from being run too hard for too long without adequate recovery time." He shook his head in disgust. Racing injuries pushed well past the warning signs. Emma's heart sank. Can he recover? "Recover to what extent is the question," Dr. Michaels replied honestly. "He'll never race again, not that we'd want him to, but with proper treatment, time, and careful rehabilitation, he could have a comfortable life. Maybe even be rideable for light work eventually, though that's not a guarantee." Emma nodded, absorbing this. "What do we need to do?" "I'll start him on anti-inflammatories and draw blood for a full panel. We should do radiographs and ultrasound to get a complete picture of the damage. I can bring my portable equipment tomorrow." He paused, clearly considering the sanctuary's financial constraints. "I have a few new treatments we could try. Stem cell therapy has shown promising results for these types of injuries, though it's not inexpensive." The unspoken question hung in the air. Could the rescue afford such specialized treatment? Emma glanced at Thunder, who was now watching them intently as if aware they were discussing his fate. "I'll talk to Diane," she said finally. "If there's a way to give him his best chance, we'll find it." After Dr. Michaels left, having administered the initial medications and scheduled his return for the following morning, Emma sat on an overturned bucket outside Thunder's stall. The barn was quiet, except for the occasional soft nickering of horses and the rustle of straw as they shifted in their stalls. It was Emma's favorite time at the sanctuary. Peaceful, contemplative, a time when she could feel the rightness of the path she'd chosen in life despite its many challenges. She opened the manila envelope Mike had given her, curious about Thunder's history. Inside, she found his jockey club registration papers, racing record, and several veterinary reports. As she began to read, a picture emerged of a horse who had once been valued at over $250,000, a descendant of multiple Kentucky Derby winners with impressive speed and heart. Midnight Thunder had won his first 4 starts as a 3-year-old, catching the attention of a wealthy banker named Richard Harrington, who purchased him for an undisclosed but presumably substantial sum. Under Harrington's ownership, Thunder had been pushed hard, racing every few weeks despite veterinary recommendations for more recovery time between races. The vet reports documented the beginning of his leg issues with clear warnings that continued racing would lead to career-ending injuries. The final report, dated just 3 weeks ago, stated bluntly, "Subject is no longer suitable for racing. Recommend minimum 12 months rest with appropriate rehabilitation if any athletic career is to be considered in the future." Apparently, Harrington had taken this assessment as a reason to discard the horse entirely, rather than invest in his recovery. The last document in the file was a sale receipt to the auction house, the amount far less than Thunder had once been worth. The horse had gone from being a prized athlete to disposable in the space of a few years. "People can be so cruel," Emma murmured, sliding the papers back into the envelope. She looked up to find Thunder watching her, his dark eyes reflecting the dim light of the barn's night lamps. "But you got lucky today, Thunder. You found your way to people who see your worth beyond your ability to win races." Thunder nickered softly, as if acknowledging her words. Emma stood and approached the stall, extending her hand. After a moment's hesitation, the horse stepped forward, his movements stiff and careful, and gently pressed his muzzle into her palm. "I promise you," Emma whispered, feeling the soft warmth of his breath against her skin, "no one will ever throw you away again." Over the next few days, Thunder's medical assessment was completed, confirming Dr. Michaels's initial diagnosis. The ultrasounds revealed extensive damage to the tendons and ligaments in both front legs, with the right being significantly worse. There was also evidence of arthritis beginning to develop in his ankles, another common aftermath of the pounding racehorses endured. Diane, after reviewing the findings, made the decision to proceed with the stem cell therapy Dr. Michaels had suggested. "We'll have to dip into our emergency fund," she told Emma, "but if it gives him a fighting chance at a pain-free life, it's worth it. Besides, his story has touched a lot of people." It was true. News of the thoroughbred who had knelt during his auction had spread quickly through the local equestrian community and beyond. A video someone had taken on their phone had even gone viral on social media, leading to an unexpected influx of donations specifically for Thunder's care. People were moved by the image of the once proud racehorse humbling himself, seemingly pleading for mercy in the only way he could. The procedure was scheduled for the following week, giving Thunder time to settle into his new environment and for his overall health to stabilize. During this time, Emma spent hours with him daily, not just caring for his physical needs, but talking to him, grooming him gently, and simply being present. She'd worked with many rescued horses over the years and had seen firsthand how they responded to consistent, kind human interaction after experiencing neglect or abuse. Some took months to trust again, while others seemed almost desperate for affection, as if making up for lost time. Thunder fell somewhere in between, wary but willing, cautious but curious. "You're quite the celebrity now," Emma told him one evening as she carefully wrapped his legs with supportive bandages. "People from all over are asking about you, sending donations for your treatment. You've touched a lot of hearts, Thunder." The horse lowered his head to nudge her shoulder gently, a gesture that had already become familiar between them. It never failed to make Emma smile, this small acknowledgement of connection that seemed to transcend the usual boundaries between human and horse. What she couldn't have anticipated, however, was just how far that connection would take them, or how many more lives would be touched by Thunder's remarkable journey from the auction block to becoming a symbol of resilience and hope. The day of Thunder's stem cell procedure arrived with a crisp autumn chill in the air. Emma had been up since dawn, ensuring everything was ready and trying to quell the anxiety that tightened her chest. Though Dr. Michaels had explained the process thoroughly and assured her it was minimally invasive, any medical procedure carried risks, especially for a horse already compromised by injury and stress. Thunder seemed to sense her concern. As she entered his stall for the final pre-procedure check, he moved toward her with more energy than he'd shown since his arrival, gently butting his head against her shoulder in what had become his signature gesture of affection. "You're going to be fine," Emma told him, as much to reassure herself as him. "Dr. Michaels is the best, and this is going to help those legs of yours heal properly." She ran her hand down his sleek neck, feeling the powerful muscles beneath his coat. Despite his injuries, there was still so much strength in him, so much life waiting to be lived. Dr. Michaels arrived with his assistant and mobile equipment, transforming the treatment area of the barn into a makeshift surgical space. The procedure involved harvesting stem cells from Thunder's own bone marrow, processing them, and then injecting them directly into the damaged tendons and ligaments. The theory was that these cells would promote healing and regeneration of the damaged tissues, potentially allowing for a more complete recovery than traditional rest and rehabilitation alone. "He'll need to be sedated," Dr. Michaels explained, preparing his equipment. "But it's not full anesthesia, so the recovery period is much shorter and less risky." Emma nodded, helping to position Thunder and soothe him as the sedative was administered. She watched his eyes grow heavy, his massive head lowering as the drugs took effect. Even in this semi-conscious state, he remained remarkably calm, as if understanding that this discomfort was necessary for his healing. The procedure itself took just over an hour, with Dr. Michaels working methodically, first extracting the bone marrow sample from Thunder's hip, then processing it in a specialized centrifuge he'd brought, and finally injecting the concentrated stem cells into the damaged areas of both front legs. Throughout it all, Emma stayed by Thunder's head, stroking him gently and murmuring reassurances. "He did beautifully," Dr. Michaels said when it was complete, removing his gloves. "Now comes the hard part, patience. He'll need strict stall rest for at least 2 weeks, then we'll reassess and likely begin a very gradual, controlled exercise program. We're talking months of rehabilitation here, Emma, not weeks." "He'll get whatever time he needs," she replied with conviction. "We're not in a hurry." As Thunder began to rouse from sedation, Emma stayed with him, ensuring he came to his feet safely and settled back into his stall comfortably. Dr. Michaels left detailed instructions for his aftercare, medication schedules, bandage changes, monitoring parameters, along with a promise to return in 3 days to check his progress. That evening, as Emma completed her final barn check, Her phone buzzed with a notification. It was Melissa, the rescue's social media coordinator, sending a link to a news segment that had just aired on a local station. "Thunder's famous," the message read. "They picked up his story from the viral video." Emma clicked the link, and there on the screen was footage from the auction, shaky cell phone video showing Thunder kneeling in the sawdust while the crowd fell silent. The news anchor's voice narrated over the images. In an extraordinary moment caught on camera, a former racehorse appeared to kneel before potential buyers at the Franklin County livestock auction, seemingly pleading for his life. The thoroughbred, later identified as Midnight Thunder, was rescued by Whispering Meadows Equine Sanctuary and is now receiving specialized medical treatment for racing injuries. The segment continued with a brief interview with Diane, explaining their mission and the challenges of rehabilitating ex-racehorses. It concluded with information on how viewers could donate to support Thunder's care and the work of the sanctuary. Emma felt a complex mix of emotions watching the story. On one hand, the publicity and potential donations would be invaluable for Thunder's care and the sanctuary's broader work. On the other, she worried about the horse becoming a spectacle. His very real pain and recovery journey turned into a feel-good viral moment that people would forget once the next story caught their attention. She looked over at Thunder, now dozing peacefully in his stall, unaware of his growing fame. "Just focus on healing, buddy," she whispered. "Let us worry about the rest." The next morning brought an unexpected surge in calls, emails, and social media messages to the sanctuary. Thunder's story had been picked up by several more news outlets overnight, including a national morning show that had featured the video segment. Donations were pouring in, along with offers of supplies, services, and even adoption inquiries, though Emma knew Thunder was nowhere near ready for a new home if he ever would be. Diane called an impromptu staff meeting to address the sudden attention. "This is an opportunity," she told the small team gathered in the sanctuary's modest office. "Not just for Thunder, but for all our horses and our mission. We need to use this moment to educate people about responsible horse ownership, the realities of the racing industry, and the importance of equine rescue work." They quickly developed a plan. Melissa would manage the increased social media attention, creating regular updates on Thunder's progress. Javier would coordinate with volunteers who were offering to help. Diane would handle media inquiries and potential major donors, and Emma would continue focusing on Thunder's direct care while documenting his rehabilitation journey. "Just remember," Diane cautioned as they dispersed to their tasks, "Thunder's welfare comes first. This isn't about publicity or fundraising. It's about giving him the best chance at a good life. Everything else is secondary." Emma carried those words with her as she returned to the barn. Thunder greeted her with a soft nicker, his eyes bright despite the discomfort he must still be feeling. She checked his bandages, administered his medications, and spent time simply talking to him while grooming the parts of him that could be safely reached without disturbing his legs. "You're causing quite a stir in the world, Thunder," she told him, carefully brushing his mane. "People are inspired by you. I just hope they remember there are hundreds of horses like you who need help too." As if on cue, her phone rang. Emma didn't recognize the number but answered anyway, thinking it might be a potential donor or volunteer. "Is this Emma Wilson?" a deep male voice inquired, "the one caring for Midnight Thunder?" "Yes, this is Emma," she replied cautiously. "Who's calling?" There was a slight pause before the man answered. "My name is Richard Harrington. I believe you have my horse." Emma's blood ran cold. Harrington, Thunder's former owner, the banker who had pushed him to race despite veterinary warnings and then discarded him when he broke down. The man whose neglect had nearly sent Thunder to slaughter. She glanced at the thoroughbred, now watching her curiously from his stall, and felt a surge of protective anger. "Mr. Harrington," she said, keeping her voice as level as possible, Midnight Thunder was legally purchased by our sanctuary at auction. He's no longer your horse." "I understand that," Harrington replied, his tone unreadable. "But I've seen the news stories. I'd like to come see him." Emma's grip tightened on her phone. "Why?" she asked bluntly. "You had your chance to do right by him. You chose to send him to auction instead." The silence that followed stretched so long that Emma wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, Harrington spoke again, his voice notably different, softer, perhaps even regretful. "I made a mistake, a terrible mistake, and I'd like the opportunity to make it right." Emma's first instinct was to refuse Harrington outright. This man had treated Thunder as a disposable asset, discarding him when he was no longer profitable. The last thing the healing horse needed was to face the person who had betrayed him so completely. "I don't think that's a good idea," she said firmly. "Thunder's recovering from a serious medical procedure. He needs rest and consistency, not disruption." "I understand your concern," Harrington replied, his voice lacking the arrogance Emma had expected. "But I'm not asking to take him back. I need to see him. Please, I can come whenever is convenient for your schedule." Emma hesitated, torn between her protective instincts and the unexpected humility in the man's tone. "Let me talk to our director," she finally said. "I'll call you back." She ended the call before Harrington could respond, then leaned against the barn wall, taking a deep breath. Thunder nickered softly from his stall, drawing her attention. He was watching her with those intelligent eyes that seemed to see straight through to her thoughts. "What do you think, buddy?" she asked him quietly. "Should we let your former owner visit? Can you forgive him when I'm not sure I can?" After discussing the situation with Diane, they agreed to allow Harrington to visit under strict conditions. He would come during a quiet time at the sanctuary. His interaction with Thunder would be supervised at all times, and at the first sign of distress from the horse, the visit would end immediately. "I'm curious about his motives," Diane admitted, "and if there's any chance of additional financial support for Thunder's care, we should at least hear him out." Emma reluctantly called Harrington back and set the visit for the following afternoon. That night she tossed and turned, unable to shake her anxiety about the meeting. What if seeing his former owner triggered trauma for Thunder? What if Harrington was coming with lawyers planning to claim the horse had been sold by mistake? By morning, dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her shoulders were tight with tension. "You look awful," Javier commented as they passed each other in the barn aisle. "Thanks," Emma replied dryly. "Richard Harrington is visiting today." Javier's eyebrows shot up. "Thunder's old owner? The one who dumped him at auction? Why would you agree to that?" Emma sighed, running a hand through her hair. "Diane thinks we should at least hear what he has to say. And he sounded, I don't know, genuinely regretful on the phone." Javier looked skeptical. "Well, I'll be around if you need backup." "Thanks. I might take you up on that." The morning passed in a blur of routine chores and care for the sanctuary's 32 resident horses. Emma spent extra time with Thunder, checking his bandages, making sure he was comfortable, and talking to him in low, reassuring tones about the upcoming visit. Whether he understood her words or not, her calm presence seemed to soothe him. Just after lunch, a sleek black Mercedes pulled into the sanctuary's gravel driveway. Emma watched from the barn as a tall man in his 50s emerged, dressed in what were clearly expensive clothes despite their casual appearance. Richard Harrington looked exactly as she had imagined, distinguished, confident, accustomed to wealth and power. Yet as he approached, she noticed something unexpected in his bearing, a hesitancy, almost a nervousness, that didn't match her mental image of the callous businessman who had discarded Thunder. "Mr. Harrington," she greeted him coolly as he reached the barn entrance. "I'm Emma Wilson." "Thank you for agreeing to see me," he replied, extending his hand. His grip was firm but not aggressive, his gaze direct but not challenging. "I appreciate the opportunity." Emma nodded curtly. "Before you see Thunder, I want to be clear about our expectations. This is a supervised visit only. Thunder is recovering from stem cell therapy to treat the injuries he sustained while racing for you. He's making good progress, but he's still fragile, both physically and emotionally." If Harrington was offended by her bluntness, he didn't show it. "I understand. I'll follow your lead completely." Emma studied him for a moment longer, then turned. "This way." She led him down the barn aisle to Thunder's stall. The thoroughbred was standing quietly, his bandaged legs a stark reminder of his condition. At their approach, he raised his head, ears pricked forward with interest. Harrington stopped several feet from the stall door, his breath catching audibly. "He looks different," he said softly. "He was severely neglected," Emma replied, unable to keep the edge from her voice. "We've been working to restore his health since the auction." Harrington nodded, his eyes never leaving Thunder. "May I approach him?" Emma moved to the stall door, positioning herself protectively. "You can come closer, but let him decide if he wants to interact with you." Harrington stepped forward slowly until he stood beside Emma at the stall door. Thunder watched them, his posture alert but not tense. There was a moment of absolute stillness as horse and former owner regarded each other, a silent communication that Emma couldn't interpret. Then, to her surprise, Thunder took a careful step forward, then another until he reached the door. He extended his nose toward Harrington, nostrils flaring as he took in the man's scent. "Hello, old friend," Harrington murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry for what happened to you." Thunder stood quietly, allowing Harrington to gently stroke his nose. There was no sign of fear or distress, only a calm acceptance that left Emma bewildered. She had expected, perhaps even hoped for, some indication that Thunder resented his former owner, some vindication of her own anger on his behalf. Instead, the horse seemed at peace with this reunion. "He was my first thoroughbred," Harrington said quietly, still caressing Thunder's muzzle. "A dream come true for a man who grew up watching the Kentucky Derby on a small TV in a rundown apartment, wishing he could someday be part of that world." Emma remained silent, unwilling to be swayed by what could be a practiced sob story. "I got caught up in it all," he continued, seeming to speak more to Thunder than to her. "The prestige, the competition, the possibility of having my horse's name in the history books. I stopped seeing him as a living being and started seeing him as an investment, a status symbol." He dropped his hand, stepping back slightly. "When he started having leg issues, all I could see were the bills and the disappointed looks from my racing friends. I convinced myself it was a business decision to cut my losses." He turned to Emma, his expression raw with what appeared to be genuine remorse. "Then I saw that video, Thunder kneeling in that auction ring, about to be sold for meat. I've never felt such shame in my life." Emma wanted to maintain her anger, to hold him accountable for Thunder's suffering, but there was something disarming about his candor. "What do you want from this visit, Mr. Harrington?" she asked directly. He looked back at Thunder, who was still watching him intently. "Forgiveness, I suppose, though I don't deserve it." He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. "And to give you this. It won't undo what I did, but it might help give Thunder the future he deserves." He handed the envelope to Emma. Inside was a check for $50,000, made out to Whispering Meadows Equine Sanctuary. Emma stared at the check in disbelief, the amount written there exceeding the sanctuary's monthly operating budget. "Mr. Harrington, this is not enough, I know," he interrupted, his gaze still fixed on Thunder. "But it's a start. It should cover his medical expenses and rehabilitation, with something left over for the other horses in your care." She carefully folded the check back into the envelope, struggling to reconcile this gesture with her preconceived notions about the man standing beside her. "Why now?" she asked. "You could have gotten him proper veterinary care when his injuries first appeared. You could have retired him, rehabilitated him yourself. Why wait until he was nearly lost forever?" Harrington's shoulders sagged slightly, the polished veneer of the successful businessman cracking to reveal something more human underneath. "That's the question I've been asking myself since I saw that video," he admitted. "The truth is ugly, Ms. Wilson. I was arrogant, selfish. I listened to trainers who told me what I wanted to hear instead of the veterinarians who told me what I needed to hear." He paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. "And I was going through a difficult divorce. Thunder's medical issues became another problem I didn't want to face, so I took the easiest way out." "For you, maybe," Emma couldn't help retorting. "Not for him." "You're right," Harrington nodded, accepting her rebuke without defense. "I failed him completely. There's no excuse for that." Thunder shifted in his stall, drawing both their attentions. He stretched his neck toward Harrington again, and this time the man tentatively reached out to stroke the white star on the horse's forehead, a distinctive marking partially hidden beneath his forelock. "He was spectacular on the track, you know," Harrington said softly. "Not just fast, but brave. He'd find openings other horses wouldn't dare take, thread through the pack like he could calculate every possible outcome. The announcer once called him Thunder by name and Thunder by nature after he came from dead last to win by 2 lengths. Despite herself, Emma found she wanted to hear more about Thunder's life before the auction. Was he always good-natured, even during his racing days? A smile touched Harrington's lips. He was a gentleman from the start, never gave the grooms any trouble, polite in the starting gate. Though he did have one quirk, he'd steal hats. Anyone foolish enough to come close to his stall wearing a baseball cap would find it snatched off their head in seconds. Emma couldn't suppress a small laugh. "He hasn't shown that particular talent here, but I'll warn the volunteers to be careful." The moment of shared amusement created a subtle shift in the atmosphere between them, like a small crack in a wall of ice. Harrington seemed to sense it too, his posture relaxing slightly. "Would it be possible," he asked hesitantly, "for me to stay updated on his progress? I understand if you'd rather not have any further contact with me, but I'd like to know how he's doing as he recovers." Emma considered the request. Her instinct was still to shield Thunder from anything connected to his painful past, but the horse himself seemed completely at ease with Harrington's presence. And the sanctuary could certainly use an ongoing relationship with someone willing to write checks of this size. "We send monthly updates to all our major donors," she said finally. "Photos, progress reports, that sort of thing. And we have volunteer days twice a month if you're interested in being more directly involved in his care." Surprise and then something like gratitude flashed across Harrington's face. "I'd like that very much. Both the updates and the volunteer opportunity. I have a lot to learn about proper horse care, it seems." "We have an educational component to our volunteer program," Emma explained, warming slightly to the idea. "No one works directly with the horses until they've completed our training sessions." Harrington nodded earnestly. "I'll start whenever you'll have me. And..." He hesitated, then pressed on. "I'd like to make this donation a monthly commitment, the same amount every month, for as long as Thunder needs care, and beyond that to support your work with other horses." Emma was speechless. Such a commitment would transform the sanctuary's financial situation entirely, allowing them to expand their rescue efforts, improve their facilities, perhaps even hire additional staff. "Mr. Harrington, that's incredibly generous, but..." "Please call me Richard," he interrupted gently. "And it's not generosity, It's accountability. For too long, I've been part of a system that uses these animals and then discards them. It's time I became part of the solution instead. Before Emma could respond, Diane appeared at the end of the barn aisle, her expression curious. Emma waved her over, making quick introductions. "Mr. Harrington has made a significant donation to the sanctuary," she explained, handing the envelope to Diane, whose eyes widened as she saw the amount. "This is extraordinarily generous," Diane said, recovering her composure quickly. "Thank you." "It's just the beginning," Richard replied, repeating his offer of monthly support. As he and Diane began discussing the details, Emma turned her attention back to Thunder, who had been quietly observing the entire exchange. "What do you think of all this?" she murmured, stroking his neck. "Should we give him a second chance?" As if in answer, Thunder lowered his head to gently bump her shoulder in what had become his signature gesture of affection. Emma smiled, taking it as approval. The next few weeks brought dramatic changes to Whispering Meadows. Richard's financial support allowed them to upgrade equipment, bring in specialized rehabilitation therapists for Thunder, and even begin renovations on their oldest barn. True to his word, Richard began attending volunteer training sessions, showing up in modest work clothes and absorbing every lesson with humble attention. Thunder's recovery progressed steadily. The stem cell therapy, combined with carefully monitored exercise and excellent nutrition, was showing promising results. The inflammation in his legs had decreased significantly, and though he would always have some degree of limitation, Dr. Michaels was optimistic about his long-term prognosis. "He may never be sound enough for a traditional riding career," the vet explained during a follow-up visit. "But I can see him having a comfortable life with light riding, maybe even helping with therapeutic programs for children or veterans." Emma, who had been documenting Thunder's rehabilitation journey with daily notes and weekly photographs, found herself looking forward to his morning greeting. He would nicker softly when he saw her approaching, his eyes brightening with recognition. These small moments of connection had become the highlight of her days. One cool morning in early December, about 6 weeks after Thunder's arrival at the sanctuary, Emma arrived to find Richard already there, helping Javier muck out stalls. "Hope you don't mind," he said, pausing in his work. "I finished my volunteer certification yesterday, and Diane said I could start regular shifts." Emma nodded, finding that her initial wariness toward him had mellowed considerably over the past weeks. His commitment seemed genuine, his remorse authentic, and his willingness to get his hands dirty in the daily work of the sanctuary had earned him grudging respect from the staff. "Thunder's due for his morning walk," she said. "Would you like to join us? Dr. Michaels has approved him for 20 minutes of hand walking now, and it's good for him to have different handlers." Richard's face lit up with surprise and pleasure. "I'd be honored." Together they haltered Thunder and led him from his stall into the crisp morning air. The gelding stepped carefully but confidently, his movement smoother than it had been even a week ago. The three of them made a slow circuit of the small walking track that circled the main pasture, Thunder between them like a living bridge connecting past and present, mistake and redemption. As winter settled over Whispering Meadows, bringing shortened days and frost-covered mornings, Thunder's recovery continued to progress. By late January, he had graduated to 30 minutes of hand walking twice daily, along with specialized physiotherapy exercises to rebuild the strength in his damaged legs. The difference in his physical condition was remarkable. His coat now gleamed with health, his eyes were bright and alert, and though he would always have a slight unevenness to his gait, his movement had become increasingly fluid. Even more striking was the transformation in his demeanor. The wary, defeated horse from the auction had given way to a curious, engaged personality that charmed everyone at the sanctuary. He greeted visitors with pricked ears and eager nickering, especially children around whom he showed extraordinary gentleness. "He's a different horse," Diane remarked one afternoon as she and Emma watched Thunder enjoying a supervised turnout in the small rehabilitation paddock. The gelding was moving freely within the limited space, occasionally breaking into a controlled trot that showed far more soundness than anyone had initially thought possible. "He just needed someone to believe in him," Emma replied, smiling as Thunder paused to investigate a patch of winter grass poking through the snow. "They all do." Diane nodded thoughtfully. "Speaking of believing in someone, Richard called this morning. He wants to discuss something with us. Said it's an idea about Thunder's future." Emma felt a twinge of unease. Despite Richard's consistent support over the past months, both financial and as a dedicated volunteer, she still harbored a protectiveness toward Thunder that occasionally manifested as suspicion of his former owner's intentions. "What kind of idea?" she asked cautiously. "He didn't say specifically, just that he'd like to meet with us tomorrow to discuss it." Diane gave Emma a knowing look. "Try not to jump to conclusions, Emma. Richard has proven himself trustworthy so far." Emma nodded, acknowledging the gentle rebuke. "You're right. I'll hear him out with an open mind." The following morning, Richard arrived at the sanctuary carrying a large portfolio and wearing an expression that mixed excitement with nervousness. They gathered in Diane's small office, Emma, Diane, and Richard, with steaming mugs of coffee to ward off the winter chill. "Thank you for meeting with me," Richard began, setting the portfolio on Diane's cluttered desk. "I've been doing a lot of thinking about Thunder's future, and more broadly, about the issues facing ex-racehorses. As you know, thousands of thoroughbreds leave the track each year, and many end up in situations similar to what Thunder faced." Emma nodded, having seen this reality firsthand countless times. "For every horse like Thunder who found sanctuary, dozens more disappeared into the slaughter pipeline or faced neglect in the hands of unprepared owners. I want to do something more substantial than just supporting this one sanctuary, as important as that is," Richard continued, opening the portfolio to reveal architectural drawings. "I want to establish a dedicated thoroughbred rehabilitation and retraining center, specifically designed to address the unique needs of ex-racehorses." Diane leaned forward, examining the drawings with interest. "This is an ambitious concept," she said, flipping through the pages that showed detailed plans for specialized rehabilitation facilities, training arenas, and multiple paddocks and pastures. "I have the land," Richard explained, 200 acres about 30 minutes from here that I purchased years ago as an investment. It's been sitting unused, but it's perfect for this purpose. Good soil, natural springs, existing road access." Emma studied the plans, her initial wariness giving way to cautious interest. "This would require significant funding beyond the land itself." Richard nodded. "I'm prepared to commit most of my personal wealth to establishing this foundation. After seeing what happened with Thunder, both my role in his downfall and the miracle of his recovery, I've reassessed what truly matters to me. This feels like the right way to use the resources I've accumulated." "And where does Thunder fit into this plan?" Emma asked, getting to the heart of her concern. "You mentioned his future specifically." "That's where I wanted your input," Richard replied, turning to a section of the portfolio that outlined programming ideas. "Thunder's story has resonated with so many people. I thought perhaps, if his recovery continues positively, he might serve as an ambassador for the foundation, the living embodiment of what's possible when these horses get the second chance they deserve." Emma considered this thoughtfully. "No, what exactly would that entail for him?" "Nothing strenuous or stressful," Richard assured her quickly. "Primarily just being himself, perhaps attending certain events once the center is established. His presence alone tells the story better than any speech or brochure could. But," he added firmly, "his health and well-being would remain the priority. If at any point it seemed too much for him, he would simply retire to a peaceful life at the sanctuary or the new center, whichever was deemed best for him. Diane glanced at Emma, clearly wanting her opinion as the person closest to Thunder's daily care and progress. "It's an incredible vision," Emma acknowledged, "and one that could help countless horses. As for Thunder's role..." She paused, thinking of how the gelding had blossomed with proper care and attention, how his natural charisma drew people to him. "I think he would actually thrive with a purpose. He's a horse who likes having a job, who enjoys human interaction. As long as we're careful about his physical limitations and stress levels, I believe he could be an extraordinary ambassador." Richard's relief was palpable. "I was hoping you'd say that. Of course, I want both of you involved in this project as well, to whatever extent you're comfortable. Your expertise is invaluable, and the relationship you've built with Thunder is something I wouldn't want to disrupt." "This could be a wonderful partnership with Whispering Meadows," Diane mused, already seeing the possibilities. "Our two organizations working together, sharing resources and knowledge." "Exactly what I was hoping for," Richard agreed. "And I've already spoken with Dr. Michaels, who's enthusiastic about serving as the veterinary director if we move forward." They spent the next hour discussing logistics, timelines, and the nuts and bolts of establishing such an ambitious project. By the time they finished, the initial concept had begun to take shape as a viable plan, with Thunder as its inspiration and symbolic heart. After the meeting, Emma headed straight to the barn to see Thunder, her mind buzzing with the morning's revelations. The gelding greeted her with his customary gentle headbutt, as if sensing her need for the simple comfort of their connection. "Your story might help save a lot of other horses like you," she told him, rubbing the spot between his eyes that he particularly enjoyed. "How would you feel about being a celebrity for a good cause?" Thunder's response was to lip at her coat pocket, where she always kept a few treats, making her laugh. "Always practical, aren't you? Focused on the important things like snacks." As she led him out for his afternoon walk, Emma reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. When she'd first seen Thunder at the auction, kneeling in desperate supplication, she could never have imagined the ripple effects that single moment would create, not just in her life or Thunder's, but potentially for countless other horses who would benefit from the foundation Richard was proposing. It was a reminder that sometimes the darkest moments could lead to unexpected light, that endings could become beginnings if given the chance. Thunder had been discarded, deemed worthless by the industry that had used him, yet here he was, poised to become a symbol of hope and transformation. Spring arrived at Whispering Meadows with a gentle persistence, melting the last patches of snow and coaxing tender green shoots from the soil. The changing season brought new energy to the sanctuary and marked 6 months since Thunder's dramatic rescue from the auction. The milestone wasn't lost on Emma, who had documented every step of his remarkable journey. The plans for what was now officially named Second Thunder Foundation, in honor of both Thunder's second chance and his role as the inspiration behind the project, were progressing rapidly. Richard had assembled a team of experts, including equine veterinarians specializing in sports medicine, experienced trainers focused on retraining ex-racehorses for new careers, and non-profit management professionals to ensure the foundation's sustainability. Ground had been broken on the new facility, with construction crews working to renovate the existing buildings on Richard's property and build the specialized rehabilitation areas. The project had attracted significant media attention, bringing renewed interest to Thunder's story and generating additional donations and support from unexpected quarters. Several prominent racehorse owners, perhaps seeing the writing on the wall regarding public opinion about the industry's treatment of retired horses, had made substantial contributions to the foundation. Through it all, Thunder continued to thrive. His physical rehabilitation had progressed to the point where Dr. Michaels had cleared him for light riding, brief sessions at a walk with a carefully selected, balanced rider. The first time Emma had settled into the saddle on his back, she'd been struck by a wave of emotion so powerful it had momentarily robbed her of speech. The trust this horse placed in humans, despite everything he'd been through, humbled her beyond words. "You're a better soul than most people I know," she'd whispered to him that day, leaning forward to pat his neck as they walked a gentle circuit of the arena. Today, Emma was preparing Thunder for an important milestone, his first public appearance as the Foundation's ambassador. A small ceremony was planned at the construction site, with local media invited to document the moment when Thunder would symbolically place his hoof on the cornerstone of the new rehabilitation center. It was a carefully choreographed event, designed to be brief and minimally stressful for Thunder while maximizing the emotional impact for attendees and viewers. As Emma groomed him to a gleaming shine in the morning sunlight, Melissa approached with a cup of coffee and an excited grin. "The video crew from National Geographic just arrived," she announced, handing Emma the steaming mug. "They're setting up now and want to do some preliminary interviews before the main event." Emma nodded, taking a grateful sip of coffee. The prestigious nature documentary team was creating a special feature on thoroughbred racing and its aftermath, with Thunder's story as the centerpiece. It was an extraordinary opportunity to raise awareness about the issues facing ex-racehorses on a global scale. "How's our star handling all the commotion?" Melissa asked, gesturing toward Thunder, who was calmly munching a flake of hay while Emma brushed his already immaculate coat. "Like he was born for the spotlight," Emma replied with a smile. "He actually seems to enjoy the attention." It was true. During the preceding weeks, as various film crews and photographers had visited to document his story, Thunder had displayed an almost uncanny awareness of the camera, turning to offer his best profile or pricking his ears at just the right moment. He showed none of the nervousness one might expect from a horse subjected to strange equipment and unfamiliar people. "Richard just texted," Melissa continued, checking her phone. "His flight landed and he's on his way. Should be here within the hour." Richard had been in Kentucky for the past week, meeting with racing industry officials to discuss partnerships and funding for the foundation. His vision had expanded beyond just rehabilitation to include advocacy for industry reform, promoting longer breaks between races, stricter monitoring of injuries, and mandatory retirement funding for every racehorse at the start of their career. "Perfect timing," Emma replied, applying a final touch of shine spray to Thunder's coat. "We should be ready to head over to the site by then." As Melissa departed to coordinate with the film crew, Emma found herself alone with Thunder once more. She leaned her forehead against his neck, taking a moment of quiet connection before the day's events began in earnest. "Big day today, buddy," she murmured, "but you've handled bigger challenges than this." Thunder responded by turning his head to gently nuzzle her shoulder, a gesture that never failed to warm her heart. An hour later, a small procession made its way from Whispering Meadows to the construction site of the Second Thunder Foundation. Emma led Thunder, now sporting a custom-made navy blue halter with the Foundation's logo embroidered in silver thread. Richard walked beside them, dressed in casual but polished attire appropriate for the cameras. Behind them came Diane, Dr. Michaels, and several other key figures involved in the project. The construction site had been transformed for the occasion. A temporary stage had been erected near the cornerstone, with chairs arranged for the small audience of donors, media representatives, and local officials. Banners bearing the Foundation's logo, a silhouette of a thoroughbred rising phoenix-like from stylized flames, fluttered in the gentle spring breeze. As they approached, Emma felt Thunder's step lighten, his head rising as he took in the scene before them. Far from being intimidated by the gathering, he seemed energized by it, moving with a dignity and presence that drew all eyes to him. "He knows," Richard murmured beside her. "Somehow, he understands that this is for him." Because of him. Emma nodded, unable to dispute the observation. There was something in Thunder's demeanor that suggested awareness beyond what one might expect from a horse, a comprehension of moments and meanings that occasionally left her wondering just how much he truly understood. The ceremony itself was brief, but powerful. Richard spoke eloquently about Thunder's journey from discard to inspiration, about the Foundation's mission to ensure no ex-racehorse would face the same perilous fate, and about the responsibility of humans to honor the animals who gave so much in the service of sport and entertainment. When the time came for Thunder's symbolic placement of his hoof on the cornerstone, Emma guided him forward. With a grace that belied his previous injuries, Thunder extended his right front leg, the one that had been most severely damaged, and placed his hoof precisely on the designated spot in the stone. He held the pose for several seconds, as if understanding the significance of the moment before returning to his normal stance. The crowd erupted in applause, many wiping away tears at the powerful visual metaphor of healing and purpose that Thunder embodied. Cameras clicked rapidly, capturing the moment for news outlets and social media across the country. As Emma led Thunder away from the cornerstone to begin the small meet-and-greet portion of the event, she spotted a familiar face in the crowd. A weathered, gray-haired man in a worn jacket who seemed out of place among the polished media professionals and donors. It took her a moment to place him, but then recognition dawned. Mike Peterson, the auction manager who had first directed her to Thunder's stall on that fateful day 6 months ago. He caught her eye and gave a small nod of acknowledgement, a gesture that carried the weight of shared history and unspoken understanding. Emma returned the nod, a silent thank you for the tip that had set this entire journey in motion. It was a reminder of how fragile the thread of fate could be, how easily Thunder's story might have ended in tragedy rather than triumph, if not for a chain of small decisions and chance encounters. As Thunder greeted the assembled guests with his characteristic gentle dignity, Emma reflected on the extraordinary power of second chances, not just for Thunder, but for Richard, for the hundreds of horses the Foundation would eventually save, and in some ways, for herself. Each of them had been transformed by this unlikely journey that began with a desperate act of submission in an auction ring. 1 year after Thunder's rescue, the Second Thunder Foundation held its official grand opening. The transformation of Richard's unused land into a state-of-the-art equine rehabilitation center had been completed ahead of schedule, thanks to generous donations and Richard's unwavering commitment. What had once been rolling, empty fields now housed specialized therapy pools, covered arenas with specialized footing, climate-controlled barns, and expansive paddocks designed for horses in various stages of recovery. The Foundation had already begun accepting its first residents, 15 ex-racehorses of varying ages and conditions, each with a story of their own. Some had been surrendered directly by owners who wanted better outcomes for their retired athletes. Others had been purchased from auctions or feedlots, saved from the same fate that had nearly claimed Thunder. A dedicated staff of veterinarians, equine therapists, and caretakers worked tirelessly to address each horse's physical and psychological needs. Through it all, Thunder had remained at Whispering Meadows rather than relocating to the new facility. Emma and Richard had agreed that the familiarity and peace of the sanctuary was best for him, though he made regular visits to the Foundation for special events and to interact with the new arrivals. The bond between Thunder and Emma had deepened into something extraordinary, a partnership based on mutual trust and understanding that sometimes seemed to transcend the usual boundaries between human and horse. Today marked a particularly meaningful milestone for both the Foundation and for Thunder personally. The newly established therapeutic riding program was welcoming its first participants, a group of 5 children from a local pediatric hospital's long-term care unit. These children, battling serious illnesses and the emotional toll that came with them, would be the pioneers of what the Foundation hoped would become a cornerstone of their community outreach. Emma had spent weeks preparing Thunder for this role. Though his physical capabilities remained limited by his old injuries, his temperament made him ideally suited for therapeutic work. He seemed to have an innate gentleness with vulnerable beings, a patience that couldn't be taught. "Are you ready for your most important job yet?" Emma asked him as she fastened a specially designed saddle onto his back. The tack had been custom-made to distribute weight evenly and minimize stress on his healing tendons. Thunder responded with a soft nicker, standing perfectly still as she adjusted the girth and checked that everything was secure. He was immaculately groomed, his black coat gleaming in the morning light, the white star on his forehead standing out like a beacon. "Just think," she continued, talking to him as she always did. "A year ago today, you were kneeling in that auction ring, not knowing if you'd see another sunrise. Now you're about to help children find their strength again. If that's not a second chance well spent, I don't know what is." The therapeutic session was scheduled to take place in the smaller of the Foundation's 2 indoor arenas, a space designed specifically for such programs, with soft lighting, excellent acoustics to minimize startling noises, and a viewing area where parents and medical staff could observe without creating distractions. Emma led Thunder into the arena half an hour before the children were due to arrive, giving him time to acclimate to the space. Richard was already there, deep in conversation with the therapeutic riding instructor and the hospital's child life specialist. "There he is," Richard said warmly as they approached, his face lighting up at the sight of Thunder. Despite the significant demands of establishing the Foundation, Richard had maintained his regular volunteer shifts at Whispering Meadows, developing his own relationship with Thunder that, while different from Emma's, held its own unique depth. "He's been excited all morning," Emma replied, though she couldn't have explained exactly how she knew this. It was something in the way Thunder carried himself, an alertness that suggested anticipation rather than anxiety. As they finished the final preparations, the door at the far end of the arena opened to admit a small procession, 5 children, each accompanied by a parent or nurse, making their way toward the center of the space. The children ranged in age from about 6 to 12, some walking independently, others using mobility aids. Their medical challenges were evident in various ways: a headscarf covering hair loss from chemotherapy, the frailty of extended illness, an IV pole being wheeled alongside one small boy. What struck Emma most powerfully, however, was the expressions on their faces as they caught sight of Thunder. Even the most withdrawn among them couldn't suppress a look of wonder at the magnificent animal waiting to meet them. "Good morning, everyone," the therapeutic riding instructor called out cheerfully. "Welcome to Second Thunder Foundation. Today you're going to meet a very special horse named Midnight Thunder, though we all call him Thunder for short. Thunder has his own story of healing to share with you." As the instructor briefly recounted Thunder's journey from the auction to his new life, Emma noticed how intently the children listened. There was something about his story of vulnerability, resilience, and transformation that seemed to resonate deeply with these young warriors fighting their own battles. One by one, the children were invited to approach Thunder under Emma's careful guidance. Some came forward eagerly, while others needed gentle encouragement. Thunder remained perfectly still, his ears pricked forward with interest but his body language radiating calm reassurance. The first child to ride was Lily, a 7-year-old with leukemia who had been in and out of hospitals for most of her young life. As Emma and a volunteer helped her onto Thunder's back, positioning her securely in the specialized saddle, Lily's face transformed with a joy that seemed to illuminate her from within. "He's so big!" she exclaimed, her small hands gently gripping the handle built into the saddle. "But I'm not scared." "That's because Thunder wants you to feel safe," Emma told her. "He's very good at understanding how people feel." Over the next hour, each child took a turn riding Thunder as he was led carefully around the arena. For some, it was their first time on a horse. For others, it was a return to an activity they'd enjoyed before illness had disrupted their lives. Regardless of their background, each child connected with Thunder in their own way, finding something in his gentle strength that spoke to their own struggle and courage. The most powerful moment came with the last child, a 10-year-old boy named Marcus, who had lost a leg to bone cancer. Unlike the others, Marcus had been withdrawn and reluctant, hanging back and watching with a skepticism beyond his years. When his turn came, he had initially shaken his head. "I can't," he said flatly. "Not with one leg." "Actually," the instructor had replied gently, "riding can sometimes be easier than walking for people with limb differences. The horse becomes your legs. Would you like to try, just for a minute? Thunder is very patient." After some hesitation, Marcus had agreed, though his expression remained guarded. As Emma helped him onto Thunder's back, making adjustments to accommodate his prosthetic leg, she felt the gelding shift slightly beneath her hands, not in resistance, but in what seemed like deliberate adjustment to better balance his small rider. Once settled in the saddle, Marcus sat rigid, his hands clutching the handle so tightly his knuckles whitened. Emma began leading Thunder in a slow circle, the therapeutic instructor walking alongside to ensure Marcus's security. After just a few steps, something remarkable happened. Thunder, who had followed the same basic pattern with each previous rider, suddenly halted. Before Emma could react, he turned his head back toward Marcus and let out a soft, rumbling nicker. It was a sound Emma had heard many times, Thunder's particular way of expressing affection and reassurance. The unexpectedness of it startled a small laugh from Marcus. "Is he talking to me?" he asked, his rigid posture relaxing slightly. "He is," Emma confirmed, moved by Thunder's intuitive response. "He's telling you that you're doing great and that he's got you." As they resumed their circuit of the arena, Emma watched the transformation unfold. With each step Thunder took, Marcus's confidence visibly grew. By the third circuit, he had released his death grip on the handle, sitting more naturally in the saddle. By the fifth, there was an unmistakable smile on his face. When the session finally ended and Marcus was helped down from Thunder's back, he stood for a moment with his hand on the horse's shoulder, something unspoken passing between boy and horse. "Can I come back tomorrow?" he asked, looking up at Emma with the first genuine spark of interest she'd seen in his eyes. "Thunder would like that very much," she replied, her throat tight with emotion. 5 years passed, seasons turning in their eternal cycle, each one bringing new challenges, triumphs, and quiet moments of grace to Whispering Meadows and the Second Thunder Foundation. What had begun with one desperate horse kneeling in an auction ring had blossomed into a movement that had transformed hundreds of lives, equine and human alike. The foundation had expanded beyond its original mission, now operating 3 facilities across the country, each specializing in different aspects of thoroughbred rehabilitation and second careers. Over 500 ex-racehorses had passed through their programs, finding new purpose as therapy horses, pleasure mounts, companion animals, and even competitors in disciplines from dressage to trail riding. Each success story was meticulously documented, creating an ever-growing body of evidence that these athletes deserved far more than the discard pile when their racing days ended. More importantly, the Foundation's advocacy work had begun to shift the culture of the racing industry itself. Several major racetracks had instituted mandatory retirement contributions for every horse that ran, creating a safety net for their futures. Stricter monitoring of injuries and more conservative recovery protocols had been implemented at many venues. It wasn't universal change, not yet, but it was meaningful progress. Through it all, Thunder had remained the heart and soul of the Foundation, though his role had evolved with time. Now 12 years old, he had been fully retired from active therapeutic riding 2 years earlier, when Dr. Michaels had detected early signs of arthritis in his hocks, a common development in former racehorses. Yet Thunder's contributions hadn't diminished. If anything, they deepened. He had become what the foundation staff called an equine mentor, a stable, confident presence who helped newly arrived thoroughbreds adjust to their post-racing lives. Many of these horses arrived fearful, confused, or aggressive after traumatic experiences. Thunder, with his calm demeanor and intuitive understanding, seemed to communicate with them in ways humans couldn't, helping them learn to trust again. Emma, now the Foundation's Director of Equine Welfare, still spent time with Thunder every day, their bond having grown into something legendary among staff and volunteers. Though she oversaw the care of hundreds of horses across all 3 facilities, Thunder remained her touchstone, the 4-legged partner who had changed the course of her life as surely as she had changed his. Richard, too, had been transformed by the journey that began that day at the auction. The driven businessman had given way to a passionate advocate who testified before congressional committees on animal welfare legislation and collaborated with international racing authorities on retirement standards. The foundation now consumed most of his time and resources, a commitment he embraced with the fervor of the truly converted. On a golden afternoon in early October, exactly 5 years to the day since Thunder's rescue, a special ceremony was taking place at the original Foundation campus. The Midnight Thunder Memorial Garden was being dedicated, a peaceful space where visitors could reflect on the bond between humans and horses, and where memorial plaques honored the horses who hadn't been as fortunate as Thunder, those who had been lost to slaughter or neglect before the Foundation could reach them. At the center of the garden stood a life-sized bronze statue of Thunder, captured in the moment that had started it all, kneeling, head bowed, yet with a dignity that transcended his desperate circumstances. The sculptor had worked from the original auction video and photographs, capturing with remarkable precision the paradoxical blend of vulnerability and strength that had moved so many hearts. Emma stood beside the statue now, Thunder himself at her side, as Richard addressed the gathered crowd of supporters, volunteers, and media representatives. The real Thunder, his muzzle now frosted with gray but his eyes still bright with intelligence, stood quietly beside Emma, occasionally nudging her hand for a treat or a scratch. 5 years ago today, Richard was saying, his voice carrying across the hushed gathering, a horse changed my life by showing me what true courage looks like. In that moment of surrender, of absolute vulnerability, Midnight Thunder taught me more about dignity and resilience than I had learned in 50 years of human interaction. Emma glanced at Thunder, wondering if he understood that they were celebrating him. As if in response to her unspoken question, he raised his head slightly, ears pricked toward Richard, as he continued speaking. The foundation that bears his name has helped hundreds of horses find their second acts, their new beginnings. But perhaps more importantly, it has helped hundreds of humans, myself included, rediscover our capacity for compassion, for recognizing the intrinsic worth of beings different from ourselves. As Richard concluded his remarks and invited Emma to speak, a murmur ran through the crowd. Thunder had stepped forward, moving slowly but deliberately toward the bronze statue of himself. The audience fell silent, cameras raised to capture whatever was about to happen. With Emma watching in amazed silence, Thunder approached his bronze counterpart and stretched his neck forward, nostrils flaring as he investigated this metal doppelganger. He circled the statue once, as if inspecting the craftsmanship, then came to stand directly in front of it, facing the same direction, creating a before and after image so powerful that several people in the audience audibly gasped. Then, in a moment that would be captured in countless photographs and videos shared across the world in the days to come, Thunder slowly, deliberately lowered himself to his knees beside his bronze counterpart. just as he had done 5 years earlier in the auction ring, but this time not from desperation or fear. This time, it seemed, from a place of understanding, of acknowledgement of the journey that had brought him here. The crowd stood in stunned silence, many with tears streaming down their faces at the extraordinary sight. Emma felt her own eyes well up as she moved to kneel beside Thunder, placing her hand on his neck, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing beneath her palm. "Oh, Thunder," she whispered, for his ears alone. "You knew all along, didn't you? You knew exactly what you were doing that day." After a long moment that seemed suspended in time, Thunder rose again, as gracefully as his aging legs would allow. Emma stood with him, and together they turned to face the crowd, living symbols of what was possible when second chances were given and received with open hearts. Later that evening, as twilight settled over the sanctuary and the last visitors departed, Emma took Thunder for a quiet walk around the perimeter of the property. It was their evening ritual, a peaceful interlude after the day's activities. The October air carried the scent of fallen leaves and distant wood smoke, and Thunder's hoofbeats fell in a gentle rhythm on the soft earth of the trail. "You're a miracle, you know that," Emma told him, as she often did. "Not just because you survived, but because of how many others you've helped save." Thunder nickered softly in response, bumping her shoulder in that familiar gesture of affection that had become his signature. As they crested a small rise that overlooked both Whispering Meadows and the foundation property beyond, Emma paused, taking in the view of what they had built together. Her, Thunder, Richard, and the countless others who had joined their cause along the way. Lights twinkled in the barn windows where night staff tended to new arrivals. In the nearby paddocks, dark shapes of grazing horses moved peacefully in the gathering dusk. From this vantage point, she could see all the way to the auction site where Thunder's journey had begun, now transformed into a community equestrian center where children learned to ride and care for horses under the Foundation's supervision. The circle had closed. What had once been a place of fear and despair now rang with laughter, and the joyful voices of children discovering the magic of connection with horses. Not bad for a broken-down racehorse and a rescue worker with a budget that wouldn't cover a week of your racing training fees, Emma murmured, smiling as Thunder nudged her again, perhaps urging her to continue their walk, or perhaps simply reminding her of his presence, of the miracle of their shared journey. As they turned back toward home, the first stars appearing in the darkening sky above them, Emma felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. Life didn't always offer second chances. When it did, they didn't always lead to happy endings. But sometimes, just sometimes, a moment of surrender could become a beginning rather than an end. A desperate act could spark a movement, and a single horse kneeling in an auction ring could change not just his own fate, but the fates of countless others. And that, Emma thought as Thunder walked steadily beside her toward the warmth and safety of home, was worth all the tears, all the struggle, all the uncertainty along the way. That was the true miracle of Midnight Thunder.